We're live. Jim Crowell, welcome back.
Yeah, man, it's been a little while. I appreciate you having me back, especially kind of end of the year time frame.
Yeah, it's really fun. We did this a couple of years ago, a year in review. I think it was 2 years ago. For some reason, didn't do last year, but it's always great to get your insights. I mean, you and I have known each other for such a long time. I think it's been 12 years now. Lots of stories in between then and now, but we're both kind of still in the industry, right?
Oh yeah.
Still punching and jabbing, and it's always great to catch up because you're always doing interesting stuff. I mean, we'll catch up every few months, but I always find you're doing something really new and cool. So thanks for having us on. Thanks for coming on. One of the things I want to talk about, first, and then we'll get into like the year in review, winners and losers of 2023, how we'll remember this year. We'll kind of forecast how we'll look back as we're crotchety old men, and we'll look at 2023 and say, God, I remember when, right? So it's going to be a lot of fun. And first and foremost, you're going to be speaking at the Connected Health and Fitness Summit coming up in February, or in a
I
panel of some sort. You're
yeah,
engaged in it.
I think I'm doing the pitch panel, so I'll be one of the pitch judges. I don't think I'm speaking unless that's changing.
You never know when they'll pull your card, man. Well, it's a great event, and maybe you can, because you've done it before. If you can explain to the audience, like, what is it that you like about Connected Health and Fitness? Why is it a little bit unique compared to the other conferences that you go to?
Well, what I liked about it is that a lot of the people that you want to talk to are there, but it's
Mhm.
not, 5,000 people walking in a gigantic space. It feels more intimate than a lot of events, which I like because I like getting into actual business discussions, and so you can do that very very easily there. The slate of speakers was really interesting. To be fair, I think a lot of events have really interesting speakers, but it's so closely tied together and sort of knit together that it feels more intimate. And so I appreciate that primarily about it. And then obviously I love the pitch event just because I love to see new companies and hear how they're positioning and understanding the innovative side behind what they're doing.
Awesome. Awesome, man. Well, people can learn more, connectedhealthandfitness.com. And of course, if they want to join, there's the discount code of FOF10, and people can put that in and get 10% off their fee there. So it's a great event. I encourage you to check it out. It's in LA. And yeah, so the Sage House. Now, how long have you guys actually been an entity? Has it been a year and a half, 2 years? Like time's flown by over,
Yeah.
pandemic time, but
So
give us an update on what you guys are doing.
I'll do this really quickly. I actually made a very tiny little investment back in 2018 into a friend of mine's gym.
Mhm.
And I did it through an entity called Boost Capital. And Boost Capital ended up becoming what is today called Sage House Capital.
Okay.
And then we put a holding company on top of it called the Sage House. And so now we have a consulting business called Sage House Advisors. We've got the investment business called Sage House Capital, and then the hold co is on top of it. That really came together in early 2022. So we're about 2 years in with that sort of brand and entity structure. And to be fair, the entity structure continues to get a little bit more complex as we make additional investments and put some operating vehicles together and everything. So it's been a super fun last couple years, and it's fascinating for me to think about this sort of a structure because my goal was to come out and be enduring capital in a holding company format as compared to a fund. No issue with a fund, but just for me, I wanted to try to create a flywheel of really, really strong assets that maybe we never had to sell. And so if we do that well, I'll let you know in 25 years. But if we do that well, that's really the goal is to have, compounding traits within the company structure.
Yeah. I feel like there's some things that people may not know about you too, Jim. Is like you've been in the fitness industry for a while. Like you've worked at just about every level. Like you're not
Yeah.
just someone who's come in from like, an outside industry or from finance and, built this holding company, but you've actually worked in the trenches. Maybe give people, some
Yeah.
insights on that.
Yeah. I mean, I started coaching athletes when I was about 15. So I've been coaching
Nice.
soccer and basketball and tennis. And I played tennis at Penn State. So I've been around weight rooms and, sports for my entire life and have a huge love of that. I got out of college and was a hedge fund trader. So I was trading commodities, and saw Katrina go through the Gulf and the craziness behind commodities. So I kind of cut my chops in the financial arena through the hedge fund game. And then I just completely changed course and decided to open gyms after I just fell in love with CrossFit, frankly. So I opened my first CrossFit gym in 2010 And I did everything. I mean, I had a great business partner early and everything. So like we were working together, but I coached a bunch of classes. I did my own accounting. I learned how to do sales and marketing, built what was, a terrible brand back then, right? Like just sort of learned what it took to run a gym. And we had a bunch of success in those facilities. And what I liked about CrossFit back then was that it was just pure capitalism. It's just like, if you do well, you do well. If you do poorly, well, you'll probably go out of business. I liked that. And so I learned how to do that entire thing. Ended up selling those. And then I went down to OPEX, where it was coaching education initially. And then we did facility licensing, and remote coaching was a big component of that. So it's funny to think about it now, but I got into the remote coaching game back in like 2011. So this idea that coaching is going online is not a new thing for me.
Yeah.
And I've seen what really seems to work in these systems and where technology needs to support and where it doesn't help. And then I left OPEX in 2020, and that's really where the Sage House, concept was born, and been consulting and investing in. We've done, gosh, almost 25 investments in only fitness and wellness at this point. And so I get to see a very wide swath of the fitness and wellness arena, which for me, if anybody who knows me, it's like, I just love that. I love getting to see and kind of learn how all these different business models and products and ultimately how the consumer, which sometimes the consumer is the coach or the gym, but how the consumer interacts with these products is something that I'm extremely, extremely interested in.
Yeah. Yeah. And you love the work. Like,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
I can honestly say, like, a lot of people say, no, I love work. No, Jim loves the work. And, anecdotally, it's like when we were working together on the Morpheus project, years back, is, at the end of the day, it was like a 12-hour day. We were all really tired, and we're all like, let's just, we're going to sit down and watch a movie and just let our brains. And then I'm like, look over, and there's Jim on his laptop as we're watching the computer, like building out models with Excel. I'm like, okay, this guy doesn't quit, man. It's
Yeah.
crazy. Like, you love the
Uh,
work. That's the point I'm trying to make.
I love the work. Let's not be too good about that. I sometimes overwork, but I do love the work.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Well, let's get into this. So, the first place I'd like to start is like when we look at the year in review, and we're people just right at the end of the year here as we record. Who do you think, who or what were the big winners? Who were the big losers of 2020?
This is a hard question. I think the big winners are the companies that didn't raise too much money in 2020, 2021, and even into 22, and have a product that isn't so complex that the consumer doesn't understand it. And so, we can get into some company names if you want, but what I'm seeing in 23 is a lot of very, very intelligent people building very intelligent products that don't actually connect to the consumer yet. So think about all of the AI components and all of these suggestion engines and all of these smart wearable products, right? And then you ask yourself, oh, interesting. So, like, how does the consumer interact with those things? And in many cases, they simply don't. They don't want to do work, right? I want to look at my Apple Watch and see the rings close without doing anything. And so I think that what's happening in 23 are the companies who aren't spending all kinds of money, who are figuring out how customers actually interact with their either their apps or their hardware or their services, right? So in gym. And it's those companies that are seeing how consumers like or dislike the product that are actually starting to win. I think the other huge piece, and it's coming to fruition, is infrastructure, meaning what powers the industry. So, I will keep in mind, to be fully transparent, we have investments in some of these companies. Okay. So let me just throw that on the table. But
Noted.
I look at companies like MOVR, which is a movement based assessment software, and that's starting to plug in across the board. Right. And it's like, is it health? Is it fitness? Is it gyms? Don't care, right?
Mhm.
But if you need to understand movement and how it interacts with the customer, we have a very simple system that can do an assessment, and it can then feed you exactly what you need to fix those things. I would argue a Sensei is the same way with computer
Mhm.
vision and how that starts to be able to both coach and also understand what's happening inside of a fitness space or inside of now a VR, related products. Really interesting how that's becoming sort of the backbone. Rook is another one that's aggregating all these wearable data elements and saying this is what it actually means to be healthy, etc. I've watched, Verb is another great one too, because they're starting to say, hey, this is how communication can work. And here's how AI actually supports a fitness related experience. So, not just through OpenAI, right? Like they have millions and millions and millions of messages to understand what actually constitutes positive or negative feedback. So, I'm a huge believer in infrastructure. I will continue to be a believer in infrastructure. And I think 23 was the year that both B2B, well, really it's B2B, right? B2B
Mhm.
started going, I'd rather integrate than build. And so I think you're going to see a pure hockey stick of how that actually goes out to the world. In terms of brick and mortar, I'll be honest with you. I think franchising is in a very unstable place.
Okay.
And I don't mean from a consumer sentiment standpoint. I mean from the franchisors have a lot of and not all franchisors, but a lot of the franchisors have a lot of ground to make up when it actually gets to, do you have trust with your customers? And I've spent almost this entire year studying the brick and mortar and the franchising world, how it functions, how it grows, how you build trust and run a process. And the trouble that I have with the general notion of it is that CapEx, meaning the build out costs, et cetera, are extremely high right now. And the net worth components of a lot of people are not strong enough for them to actually get out of the gates without a perfectly executed pre-sale. And so there's a lot of people who have gotten out over their skis in brick and mortar and don't know what to do, but they've signed a 10-year lease. And I think that's kind of literally in this moment beginning to erupt a bit. And so I think that certain franchisors have a lot of ground to make up as it relates to, are they actually providing a consistent product to a large percentage of their existing franchisees? I'm always going to be a believer that an in-person experience is a beautiful one. We're working on something right now, so we believe in that. But franchising is, I think, going to have some headwinds for the next 12, 18 months.
And how is that different than a corporate owned location or an independent gym? Like, how is that? How are those situations unique to franchising?
Let's just let's go at this initially from a risk standpoint, right? So if I'm a franchisor, then my risk is much more asset light. I don't have as much money to put out for each facility that goes up. I am not technically on the hook for if that facility does well or not. Of course, I want them to do well because I want my brand to be great, but two, I want the royalties that come off of the brands that do really well from a revenue standpoint. But the corporate gyms force the corporate entity to win in all of them. Otherwise, they legitimately have liabilities on their balance sheet. So it's just a different business model. Usually, people would suggest that corporate gyms grow a lot slower, and frankly, the reason is because it takes longer because you got to get more assets to build more gyms. But you get a stronger brand if you do it well, because you are in control of how everything works, soup to nuts, start to finish. Franchising is certainly a stronger amount of control than licensing or affiliation, right? But it is not quite as strong as a corporate.
And the thing of this, it's always been interesting to me. I've worked with some large franchise chains over the past 5 years, and my gut always says, like, I've run a small gym in my life, two of them, right? And it's not easy. Like,
Mm-mm.
it takes a lot of work. I haven't seen one where it's just like a business in a box. You just set it up like a McDonald's, right? And then it just, people come and they just buy your stuff. Like, I just haven't seen that yet. So it's always been like in my gut, I've always been like, I have a question. Like, like,
Yeah.
how you make it so streamlined that it just, anybody can, be an operator of a franchise, a fitness franchise, and make it work. Like, it just doesn't seem, it seems like unique in the marketplace compared to other franchise models in
Well,
other industries.
yeah, I don't think that that's any franchisor's fault, honestly. Like
No,
in terms of
no.
this general question, I think It's that human beings, when they go into a fitness franchise, and let's just go boutique. So let's not call it Planet Fitness right now, but that's a great example. But if we go boutique, for fitness franchise, the coach, trainer, instructor, whatever they're called inside of that four-wall gym is incredibly important to how people perceive the experience. And so if you try to go too fast, if you don't educate your coaches, if you don't get proof that your coaches are in fact quality and can deliver this experience, you immediately have something that is less consistent and less good than technically another franchise or a corporate gym would have. And so I just think that the bar is higher than, let's say you put a Chipotle down, right? Somebody who puts, a scoop of avocado is a very different interaction than a coach who's trying to like be 6 inches from you to help you understand how to do a kettlebell squat. You know what I mean? So the education factor is incredibly important, not just for running a process, but for interacting and engaging with humans. And that's tough.
And, I would add to that too, is that the environment of fitness, like you and I have talked about, you've written and talked about, how it's an emotional experience. Like someone in fitness is very emotional, which means that the environment has to be, has a certain humanity to it. Like you have to be able to say someone, address them by their name, right? Like ask them how things went last week. Hey, how's your kid? How's, whatever. I mean, it's got to be this welcoming environment where people can come in and feel encouraged and feel warm and welcome versus like just a place to eat. Like,
Yep.
no, I'm just in there to get my food. Like, no, it's an experience that you have to foster. And it's not something you can easily just scale up once you find a formula because there is no true formula outside of like, the human interaction. So I think that's a
Yeah.
key part that people miss.
Well, I'm a probability guy, right?
Mm.
So I look at that and I go, well, what's required? You need to hire bedside manner and teach skill. So in theory, that's two parts of the marketplace. Obviously, that's terrible language. But if I can hire better people and I can create processes around increasing my probability as having hired a better person or better people, great. And then if I can train them better and better and better and prove that my training is better and better and better, then this business in a box is closer. But the notion that somebody can buy a franchise and never step foot in it, don't know about that, right?
Yeah.
Unless you're paying more than what, I've looked at a lot of FDD docs in the last year. I would argue there is a lot of absolute nonsense as it relates to the cost structure of what is being proposed as the norm for these facilities. And so, yes, you could pay more and hire better GMs, and obviously, master franchises would do something like that, of course. But if you don't have the right talent that is educated the right way and managed the right way, you're going to work an awful lot in that facility. So the idea of owner operator still can be beautiful for a franchise. If you want to be an owner and the GM operator, like talk about somebody who has a significant amount of skin in the game and who really cares. But this hands off operator in one facility, I that's not playing out right now. At least not in the fitness stuff that I'm looking at. So people need to understand what the realities of these are. And again, you can make lots of money doing franchising, but you need to be clear on what the real game is. And I think that's why the trust factor for certain franchisors is quite low, is because they're selling something that isn't actually reality.
There's a subset that I find very interesting in the franchise world, and that's like the whatever we want to call it, the wellness slash recovery slash longevity, right? Where it's almost like an integration of medicine, and kind of a stab at preventative healthcare. How do you feel about that segment moving forward? Because I feel like over the last 2 years, it's really emerged. This year, it's emerged very strongly as a category.
Yep.
So, what do you forecast for that?
I think there's lots of different types of wellness. There's clearly like medical concierge health, which is very different than, like recovery places. I think one of the best recovery places is Pause. They're doing a really
Mhm.
nice job of building that
Yep.
out.
Travel club.
If I go to principles, though, to me, there are a couple of factors that I have to understand before I give a thesis, right? One is it human centric or is it technology centric? So do I walk in, see a front desk person and then just go sit in, a cold plunge, then a sauna, then a float tank, then I do my red light recovery? Like am I just walking technology to technology? Or is there a human experience where I'm being led through a certain type of concierge something? If it's the former and it's tech based, well, you probably have a capital heavier, meaning it's more expensive to open, but an operating expense lighter model. So in theory, you might be able to get better EBITDA margins, which franchising, it's all about EBITDA margins, right? At the end of the day. And so if I can prove that out, that's really interesting. Now, the issue with that is that that technically could become a commodity if everybody's using the same technology, right? So if you don't have your own technology, or if you don't have a very unique take on how it works, or if you don't have better processes, better real estate components, which, John from Pause, right, was a real estate guy as far as I know before. And so like he really is thinking about all those elements as well, which I can tell you from looking at franchising over the last year, that's really important. And so you have to have those systems better and better and better. But in theory, if there isn't a tangible differentiating factor, then there is a bit more risk that somebody could try to duplicate it. And so you have to stay out ahead with customer captivity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you go to concierge health ish, right, where it's like there's a doctor or there's a wellness practitioner, whatever the terminology is, you still face those issues that we talked about from fitness, though a little bit different. They need to be better engaging because I think the reason why wellness is coming through is because people are quite fed up with a general doctor experience, right? Like, I don't want to walk in there and get 96 seconds from my doctor, not really be able to ask questions, and then get sent this huge bill for whether it's supplements on the naturo side or it's actual big pharma stuff on the medical side. And so I think what you're seeing is like, what's the experience that I as a consumer like? Because yes, I think that this stuff will be connected to insurance. But right now, people are paying out of pocket for it. And so it's the companies that have the better experience that are working. Did that answer the question, or is that?
Yeah, I mean, there was no real specific question. I want to get your thoughts and opinions on the category in general, which I think you
Okay.
just did really well.
Well,
Um,
so it is definitely emerging.
mhm.
Longevity and wellness as it relates to longevity is here. So like, if we want another 2023 theme, I think it's here. And I think it's because of Peter Attia and Stacy Sims and Huberman and blah, 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 right?
Yep.
So it's here. And so now the question is people are going, okay, I want to try it. And, I don't have the internal data, but those places would to say, are they continuing to use it? That's what I would want to know the most. And not for 2 or 3 months, but for like 6 or 12 months. It'd be fascinating to know if people keep coming in and using it. I'm a huge believer in the concepts, but only if people have a general level of health and exercise and good food as well. Otherwise, I think it's a band-aid, right? It's like, I don't care how many cold plunges you do if you're eating fast food and not moving. It just doesn't matter, right? So if doing cold plunge gets you to eat better and exercise more, I'm all for it. I'm all for it. But there are a lot of people who are like, so I just need to do a cold plunge and I'm good. It's like, no, that's not going to work. It's not going to work. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I like the category. I do think the category is quite separate of fitness generally. So like I'm not fully there that these massive facilities doing all things under one roof will work as simplistically as people think they will, because I think that people are beginning to separate the brands in their brains. I go here to train hard. I go here to recover in a relaxed way. I go here for my meditation. I go here for my medicine. I think that is important to remember. And so Lifetime coming in, and putting wellness clinics, all for it. And I think that could potentially work. But notice that at least so far, it's a different brand.
Yeah.
So it's like, I can go to Lifetime, but I'm going to have two bills and whatever. It's like, interesting. But will everybody go to Lifetime for that? Or will they want the niche expert in that thing? I think there's a lot of people who will want the niche expert, and they're perfectly fine to go to a different place. So I think there's a place for both of those things is what I'm saying. And to your point on what I often say about the emotionality of fitness and wellness, there's no chance, in my opinion, like literally I'd put this at 0.000001% chance that one company will rule all of fitness and wellness. I just do not see it coming because the way that you have to speak to consumers is so different to get them to take action in fitness and wellness.
Yeah, it's a really interesting take. One of the things I want to cover is like, I feel like public companies, you and I were talking before we started recording, have really gotten a lot of, at least in our industry press, have really gotten a lot of attention this year, good and bad, right? I mean, F45, Expo, Peloton, Nautilus slash Bowflex, Planet Fitness, like all these companies have been in headlines quite a bit. And, it's interesting to me to see fitness companies, listed in Wall Street, right? And how Wall Street is reacting to our industry overall. So, when you look at all these headlines of these companies in the public sector, like what are some of your takeaways this year and thoughts moving forward?
Generally speaking, Wall Street hates fitness.
Right.
I mean, let's just be realistic, right? They don't like it. You could argue that it looked like they were going to like Expo until I don't remember May, and Expo has gone from 36 to it was at 8 and now it's back at 11 or as we're talking today. There's a lot of reasons for that, okay? Obviously the big research report from Fuzzy Panda was not good for
Mhm.
Expo, and there's been some recent Bloomberg articles that are not good. But what was most interesting to me is that you didn't see a boatload of new buyers come in when the stock got knocked in half, right? So, like, if you look at the volumes, at least from what I've seen, and I'm not deeply studied it, the volumes are on the way down, which means people are like, I'm probably done with this. And
Mhm.
so, until you see an event where the volume pops back up, I think that the sentiment has probably changed to the more negative. Now, Planet's stock has looked generally pretty good. Lifetime got beat up
Yep.
this year, and maybe they're kind of, I'm saying this in a positive way, like flatlining to try to figure out what's next, right? But Lifetime's looked okay. Peloton has just been god awful since, whatever, early 21. I will say though, I think Peloton's figuring some things out, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think they're beginning to figure some things out. I don't think that that's really reflected in the stock price, but I looked at the most recent earnings reports and I was like, interesting. Good amount of cash on the books. They're actually starting to get some things cleaned off of the books finally. I mean, I'm a big fan of Barry McCarthy, so like I think he's very, very smart. I don't know him personally, but I think he's very, very smart. And so they have chosen a pathway, right? And the pathway is inclusivity. And that's what they're like, they're going to die on that hill. Right. And so it's like,
Mm.
I respect that's what they want to do. And so I think that Peloton needed to do something like that because they need a captive customer base, which has been historically their competitive advantage. So,
Expand on that.
yeah,
What do you mean by inclusivity? Like when you see that? Because when I look at Peloton, I look at so far this year, just like them throwing a bunch of stuff against the wall, hoping some of it
which
will
they
stick.
have. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So
S-
where do you see the clarity in the direction moving
I,
forward and specifically in
yeah,
inclusivity?
I will go to two, and I'm sure people will want to argue this with me, but I will go to a
Sure.
couple years ago, the Christmas ad that you either saw an ad for somebody in a $15 million New York penthouse apartment, or you
Yes.
saw the ad where it looked like the guy was telling his wife she needed to be hotter, right? Like, and it's like, that's an interesting brand, for Peloton, right? Like the more elite crowd and whatever. You now see a much, much more diverse set of instructors, a much different tone of voice. You see them pushing back on where their ad dollars are going to go. Now, some people would argue that was a big mistake, right? But they're picking their lane and they're saying, this is going to be Peloton, and we're going to build a culture around it, and we're going to build a customer base around it. Like it or not, this is it. Now, one of the things that Peloton, as far as I know, still has, people like doing the damn rides.
Yeah.
Like we can't forget about that. People like
Yeah.
doing Peloton rides. So if Peloton starts to see their subscriber base grow, the stock will go up because at least from what I saw, they have enough cash on the books to handle it unless there's some big event that I don't know, is coming. But I think that Peloton is beginning to understand who they are. To your point, they've thrown a lot of things against the wall. I think they're starting to be like, yep, didn't work, didn't work, didn't work. That worked, that worked, lever that, lever that. And it seems like they're moving in that direction. But I would not consider myself like an insider expert on it at all.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting because I want Peloton to do well. I cheer for Peloton. It seems like a lot of people in the industry have just kind of just want to tear them down. That's why it is.
Yeah.
It's
I
like
know I know
the
so
people
many
talking about,
people. I mean, more than any other fitness company out there, truly. I know so many people who got a Peloton and still ride to this day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times a week who just can't find any consistency anywhere outside of the Peloton. It's like, that's awesome.
yeah,
That's awesome. You don't do strength training? I get it. You keep riding that damn Peloton,
yeah.
right? Like that is a powerful, powerful thing. Now, of course, other companies do the same thing. I'm not saying Peloton's on their own, but that's really important for us to remember is they created something that a lot of people liked to do for exercise.
You brought it up too. So strength training seems to have really a renaissance moment, right? Over the last year. Like it's really starting to come into the forefront. We've talked about numerous times on the show, like we've seen the numbers. People are more engaged in strength training, especially women. Anecdotally, I go to my gym. It's harder for me to get a squat rack. I got to wait now, right? Which is great. I used to be grumpy and like, these people don't even know how to lift. Get out of my way. Now I'm like really generally excited about seeing it. So do you agree with that trend that strength training is up? And then what do you think may be driving it?
Uh, yes, in a big way, I believe in that trend, and we're putting dollars behind it for what it's worth. I think a lot of this is stemming from the studies that are showing that strength training is really important for aging.
Yeah.
And so let's just start there. It's like more people think there's a medical reason to do it. So they will stomach some like, okay, like I'm not quite sure. So like I'll get on a machine. And then I see all these people who look yoked doing a back squat. So like maybe I'll grab that kettlebell and do some squats with the kettlebell. And so what I'm seeing, because I'm still training in the Globo gym right now, which is fascinating, research material. I'm seeing more and more people looking at their phones, and it looks to me like they're looking at programs. And so I think strength is becoming more accessible because there's programs that help people understand what to do and how to do it digitally. So you don't have to pick a number, $100 an hour for personal training to do a back squat. And I think people believe that it's now important to not necessarily be bodybuilder strong, but to get more strength because muscle helps you burn fat and muscle helps you age better. Gabrielle Lyons and right, like that crew is really nailing this point home. And, because there's an MD behind a lot of people talking about this right now, regular Joes are saying, I'm going to try that. And then I just posted about this a couple days ago. When you do strength training for the first time, if you do it safely, you really start to feel it. And then you really start to feel momentum because you're like, I did that 7-pound dumbbell 2 weeks ago. And now I'm on the 10. It's like, that feels good. I want to keep doing that. And so I think there's a lot of emotional components and also, let's just call it structural components behind this trend. I don't think it's going anywhere. I think if
Yeah.
anything, it's going to be bigger.
Yeah. It's interesting too. And I don't know if you saw this, but Tonal released a small report. It's more of a trends
Yep.
report. Now, as all this stuff is very encouraging. Of course, their numbers are going to be skewed to people with strength training because that's what Tonal is.
Yep.
But you're right. I mean, some of the things like we talked about motionality of it, but we all know like a novice weightlifter, someone who's just getting into it will see extreme progress in the initial
Yep.
6 months, right? Like it's crazy. And where else do you get that? Like you don't jump on an exercise, like a cardio piece of equipment and see this huge trend in progress like that. That's big for
Well,
people.
so interestingly enough, I would argue that you could see a lot of progress, generally speaking, in aerobic, but that's not how almost anybody does it. It's
Right.
like I get on the treadmill and I walk. It's like, awesome, great. But that's very different than moving up a physically new dumbbell.
Yes.
Like went from the 7 to the 10. It's like, what did you do on the treadmill? I walked another couple minutes. It's like, ooh, let's definitely hammer home on that. You went from 7 minutes on the treadmill to 9 minutes. That's a celebration. And so I think, right, that's one of the reasons I think coaches are so important is because they can call out that little thing and make the person recognize it's like you pushed yourself and got better. And getting better feels really, really good. And so I think whether it's tonal or I mean, like, we love obviously speed and Proteus, right? And so like you start to look at those products and you go, it's now becoming easier to quantify. Right. And so there's a lot of really cool assessment based stuff, and there's a lot of really cool training based stuff to help you understand if you're getting stronger, which feels really good. And so let's go back to the treadmill example. I do know, can I run a mile on, I don't know, speed 7? And then can I run a mile 2 months later at speed 8? That's interesting if I can do that. Now I can do that in the same format, except with strength. First time ever. That's really cool.
Yeah, I love it. I want to make sure I've been thinking about this question all morning and how to phrase it because I think how you phrase questions is important. So when we look back in 2033, right, and we can zoom out a little bit from outside of the industry. When we look back 10 years from now on this year, I think it's one of those like frog boiling in the water
Mm.
moments, right? Where maybe as we're going through it, we're like, huh, well, that's cool. Back to my day, right? Huh, wow, I can't believe that happened. But there's been a lot of moments this year that I think we're going to look back historic and be like 2007 was such a critical moment for technology, right? For so many different reasons. The iPhone release was big. And then, open source programming, things like that. Like it was just a really big year for technology. And I feel like we're kind of seeing something like that this year. So here's the question 10 years from now, when we look back on 2023, what do you think we're going to remember it for?
Oh, weight loss drugs, and and the GLP-1s, I think, was huge. And I think that that is such a large percentage of the market. Now, obviously today it's very expensive and it's invasive, but clearly that will start to change, or at least I believe that will start to change. I think the actual use of artificial intelligence it's still early in the fitness space, so a lot of it's still clunky and not really that good, but it's actually being used and being tested, at scale right now, which I think is very, very interesting. I'm going to go back to infrastructure. I think the APIs and SDKs, and so like the pipes are being built in the fitness industry to allow a lot of companies to start that would have otherwise not been able to have remotely this kind of technology before. I think that's going to have a big component, important element to just creating companies. I think that we're going to look at 2023 also as the year that people recognize that they need other humans and or mental health support. And so, like, I feel like this year in particular is a very different feel around psychology, telehealth, telepsychology, etc. And I think
Mhm.
that that is going to have far reaching effects just simply from a stigma standpoint, which gets new startups into the mix, which gets a lot more people to try it, which allows a lot more data to be collected and da 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 da. So those things, at least initially in my mind, hit first. And certainly there's a lot of hardware components, but maybe that's a different category.
No, I agree with all those. And I think especially generative AI. I mean, we're going to look back at this time, like about a year ago, we didn't really have Chat GPT. Like
Nope.
we didn't have access to it. And it's incredible how fast it's moving and how it's become just a cornerstone. Like this morning to prepare for this interview, I was asking ChatGPT questions. 1 year ago, I didn't have that,
Yeah.
right? I was
Yeah.
asking like, "Hey, give me a list of these types of companies. Do this for me," and then refine the list. And I was like, everyone's starting to get to use it more and more, and that's mind blowing, Jim. Like,
Yeah.
like the future is here, and I don't know if people really have grasped that yet. Right?
Yeah. I mean, most everybody that I know uses it in some capacity.
Right.
Some version of OpenAI, or obviously Google just released their newest like it's going to move intensely fast. It sounds like we're pretty darn close to a version of quantum computing, which is going to upend everything when that comes out. And so I do believe that our brains are being rewired in real time to change the way that we both do work and demand things. So think about how much our world changed when we started being able to ask Google at dinner who won this game or what, this, historic event was. But now imagine when it can actually answer complicated things. That's really interesting. If we put the fitness and wellness lens on it, I'm seeing some incredibly ambitious projects, right? Like I am seeing a lot of people plug into OpenAI and then build their own, MLAI type components within that. But I'm also seeing some very, very smart people build their own versions of AI that, let's just call it, are more generalizable, meaning I can ingest this data from a gym, from a coach, from a system, and that data gets ingested and spits out the answer, i.e., what did I say right out of the gates? The stuff that asks too much of the consumer and that forces too much time and energy isn't being picked up. You're going to see that data become important because there are now engines that can understand all those different things and make recommendations and or fitness wellness programs, and then start to intervene with the client or the member when is necessary because it has that level of understanding. It's definitely going to be highly disruptive. I think if done correctly in a positive way, but it's going to be highly disruptive of the space in the space.
Yeah. And I feel like I can't remember what guest I had on this year that put it in this way. It's like we're kind of at that point, like when the internet came out, and there was like DOS prompts, right? Like it's how we are actually interfacing with the technology.
Yep.
Kind of we're in that sweet moment right now. Like how are we going to interface with this game changing, like world changing technology? And I think that's something a lot of very very smart people are working on.
Couldn't agree with you more on
So
that, by the way.
oh, good.
Yeah.
Uh, so looking forward, because we've been talking about the year, but in 2024, as we go on, what has you most excited? I'm sure we covered a bunch of it, but maybe just to recap, like what are you really excited about, Jim?
I'm a bit of a weirdo, so let me start there. I think you're going to see some consolidation in the space. And so I think you're going to see
Mhm.
multiple brands team up, and some of them are going to be stronger than others, but I don't think they're going to be, eight versions of X piece of hardware and or software. So I think you're going to see that. It's starting to happen behind the scenes, but I think you're going to see more of that. I think you're going to see a lot more integration technology make existing experiences significantly better. So again, go back to infrastructure. Like that's really starting to happen. And with a little bit of, I'm way oversimplifying it, but with a little bit of design work in existing apps mixed with these APIs and SDKs, you actually can enhance the experience, whether digitally or in person, in a pretty significant way. I think there are going to be headwinds in franchising. That's my opinion. I hope I'm wrong because I think in person is such a valuable tool. I think customers want it, but I think franchisors are going to have a tough 2024. Just rebuilding some stuff. I still think Planet Fitness, etc., are going to be pretty strong, and I think that we're going to see. I think you're going to see a big, big push into experiential digital because I
Hmm.
think the Oculus 3 is a giant step up. I think the Apple VR headset, I can't remember what it's called, but I think that's a gigantic step up. Um, guys like Ryan DeLuca have been working on VR, brick and mortar for like 7 years and it's getting good. And so I think you're going, and Lumen, right? Lumen's an interesting brick and mortar concept that's coming out. I think you're going to see a big push in the new version of experience. And so I think we'll go a long ways in 24. I don't know yet, just to be fair, what the customer though is going to latch onto the best. And so I don't think that a humanly coached experience is going anywhere. So I just want to be careful, clear on that. But I do think there are going to be lots of new and interesting experiences that people will like and want to try, because it's getting easier to put it together. And like you're saying, the underlying tech stack is now being built onable much better so that these systems can come out without being a $50 million initial investment.
Yeah, fascinating. Love it. Well, Jim, I know you got to run to other meetings this morning. Where'd you like people to go? If they want to learn more or connect with you, what's the best place for
Yeah,
them to be?
I'm just Jim Crowell on LinkedIn, Crowell. And as I always do, email is Jim at the Sage House. So feel free to hit me up, or if you got some amazing ideas, I'm happy to take a look or get on a call.
Yeah. And I encourage people to do so. It's really fun talking to you. So
Awesome, man.
just
Thanks
from
for
that.
having me on, Eric. I always
Uh,
enjoy it.
yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, Jim Crowell.
See you guys.